there's like 10 billion streaming services now, and they're all getting in on the production end of the game.
Yep.
Amazon's producing series and movies, Netflix, Hulu, all of them. Even Shudder.
Yep.
What's that you say? Chances are you haven't heard of Shudder unless you're a horror fan. Shudder is basically a streaming service for horror aficionados. So they focus on, that's all their catalog.
And all 3 subscribers love it.
Yes. Unless it keeps on crashing, which it often does. They might have changed that, but when I was using it, I was like, serious, dude, it crashed again? Can I go back to this movie now? Oh, wait, I can't. It had problems, what I'm saying. I'm hoping they got over it, though, because Revenge is, if I'm not mistaken, this is their first feature production. I may be wrong about that, but if it isn't, it should be, because it's a good way to start if it is. At least in my opinion. I don't know about you. This is a French American production. It is called Revenge. And it is basically, if we're going to summarize it into one little capsule, it is basically a rape revenge movie in the vein of I Spit on Your Grave.
Yeah.
A woman is defiled and ravaged by a group of men, left for dead, but lo and behold, she is not, and she comes back to exact, yes,
the title.
Apropos the title, her revenge.
Yeah.
There you go. There you have it. Here's the thing, man. I Spit on Your Grave is an exploitation film that was originally made in the 70s, and it is very exploitative. The thing about exploitation films is that they gave the illusion of empowerment, and sometimes they achieved it. Don't get me wrong. Blaxploitation films especially, they were meant to exploit black audiences for their money by appealing to them. But
making cool guys.
But they kind of de facto created superheroes for the black community.
Yeah.
Inadvertently. They just created cool, admirable fucking heroes for the black community to root. And likewise with other movies, you had a similar effect, but sometimes you didn't. Like Notsploitation movies, which exploited, obviously, Nazism and the Holocaust and stuff like that. There was very little redeeming quality to those.
Yeah, that is a weird thing.
Like Ilsa.
Ilsa's pretty great, though.
Ilsa, what was it?
She-Wolf of the SS.
She-Wolf of the SS. The only redeeming quality to that was that you got to see Diane Thorpe's big-ass titties.
Yeah, those some good-ass titties, too.
Yeah, they were great. They were fantastic, actually. Some of the best tits ever.
Yeah.
The point is, that's not enough to justify using Nazism as a form of entertainment. But...
Close, though.
Close. The titties were pretty fucking epic.
Yeah.
World War II ending titties. But when you talk about rape, I mean, that's a pretty heavy subject.
Yeah.
And a movie like I Spit on Your Grave kind of walked that line pretty well.
Yeah, I would say it did.
But it was grossly exploitative at the same time.
Yeah, you have a freaking 30-minute long rape scene.
It's a long-ass rape scene.
Which, granted, is effective because...
It makes you feel
uncomfortable. It makes you want the revenge.
But that's where the...
But it kind of revels too much.
Yes, exactly. That's where the exploitation goes haywire because it doesn't become exploitative of the crime. It becomes exploitative in the sense that it revels in the crime.
Yeah.
Then it gives you her revenge, so it justifies it. Oh, look, she got her revenge, so it's okay that we let you see 7 hours of somebody getting raped.
Yeah.
So it's kind of one of those movies that leaves you feeling very dirty. So... Revenge, on the other hand, I think, in my opinion, pro number one for me is that it managed to be both exploitative and it managed not only to... It kind of flagrantly flaunts its exploitative roots to make its point. It doesn't shy away from the fact that it takes a lot of influence from films like I Spit on Your Grave at all. But that's how it makes its very important points. So, in essence, it doesn't revel in the madness. It doesn't show you 30 minutes of fucking rape.
It's pretty quick.
It actually presents it in a very succinct fashion. And it's more about the eventuality of it that's discomforting.
Yeah.
And then the aftermath of that is also discomforting.
Yeah.
So, it doesn't exploit the actual act. But it does... take on the tropes of the genre in terms of the way it presents the revenge that follows it. So I think that's a big, big, big pro for me. That it managed to juggle this subgenre to its means. Pro number one for me. What's a pro for you?
Pro. The chick's kind of hot.
Yeah, Matilda Lutz is super hot. Let's face it, okay?
I like how I undid everything.
This is kind of weird to say because the film, I mean, has her defiled.
Yeah.
But she is attractive. But see, you say that, and I'm gonna help you turn that into something legit because the film manages to tell her story arc not only in the sense of dialogue and the way the story develops, but in the way the film is shot. I told you when we first sat down to see the movie that the beginnings might remind you like of a Showtime erotic thriller. And it revels in that, you know? The camera almost lasciviously stares at her ass. Yeah. It lingers on these shots of her that amp up her sexuality. You know, it gives you that vibe of a Showtime erotic thriller, you know, a Skinemax thriller. But it does all that as a means to an end. It makes you feel fucked up for thinking she's kind of hot because really, at the end of it all, it's showing you this through the lens of the people that are gawking at her, which are the three males in this movie. Her beau, which is really they're in an adulterous relationship, and his two friends, which are kind of like weekend warrior hunter types that come over to his place, you know, out in the desert. And really, when things come to a head as far as her rape goes, you kind of feel fucked up that you think she's hot because you were in the shoes of these very fucking people that were seeing her that way. And the movie presents that way at first. You know, it shows you, like I say, the camera's almost lewd in the way it presents her. But by the time she goes through this horrendous event, she's virtually, you know, in bras and panties the whole movie after that.
Yeah.
But all sexuality is removed from the character. And never does the camera linger on her in a sexual way anymore. You know, they managed to take that and strike up some sort of balance here. And I think that's pretty amazing, really, man. That you could take a phenomenal ass and make you go, hey, you know what? I kind of can't say that's a phenomenal ass, even though it is, because you kind of empathize with the character. I mean, you really empathize with the character to that degree. But yeah, on your note, big pro is that anus.
I just want to point out to add to my really dumb pro that you twisted into a pretty okay pro. Like her face in the beginning kind of has a resemblance to Shakira at points. Mm-hmm. And by the end, she ends up kind of looking like...
Jessica Alba?
Yes! Yes!
Yes, I knew it, dude.
I was like, the Albmeister! Her hair even turns darker.
Yeah. Oh, man. I was wanting to tell you, but since you always rebuke me when I go, dude, that looks like so... I was like, he's not going to buy it. She absolutely looks like Jessica Alba by the fucking end of this movie. It's kind of weird.
Only like hot.
Yeah. I mean, Jessica Alba's hot.
Yeah, she's...
The point is...
I stroked it to her once.
Another pro for me, man, is... the cinematography in this, it's like a fucking like Technicolor nightmare or something, you know, lots of bright hues, really dense colors.
It's kind of it's kind of that style that not a lot, but some movies try to do that's supposed to be a throwback to the 80s, but it was never really a style that existed in the 80s, you know, like Kung Fury did that and stuff like that. Except imagine that only toned down to a point that it's believable. It's not obviously over the top, but it goes along with the music also. Is very sets that tone of kind of like a throwbacky type of feel. But yeah, it has a lot of bright colors and
yeah, it definitely gives it its own distinct flavor. And again, yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. It gives you a feeling of deja vu, of familiarity, despite the fact that really there's no other movie of this ilk that looked like that or presented itself that way. To go hand in hand with the cinematography and the lighting and stuff and the rich, dense color schemes. I like to point out also the camera work and the shot setups in this. Some are really nice, picturesque shots. Some of the camera work, especially towards the end, is really used to amp up the tension of the cat and mouse kind of between her and her, you know, her predators, as it were. So yeah, it was really, really adept camera work, and again some beautiful, beautiful, beautiful shots in this movie. There is another pro for me that I got to point out, and I'm sure you'll agree with this. Maybe you won't though. There's a lot of symbolism in this movie.
Yeah.
Tons of symbolism, especially in regards to animals. You know, be it an ant, be it lizards, be it a hawk, even the image of like almost like a phoenix rising out of the fire. They're all used to push the story arc of this character, which is virtually wordless the bulk of the movie along. You know, you get the impressions of where she's at from these creatures rather than from her. I mean, obviously from her, but these things just accentuate her journey, her story arc, which I thought was really neat and really cool. And it's done really well. I especially enjoyed the part where she's cauterizing her wounds, and she does it with can that leaves the imprint of, you know, like a phoenix rising out of the fire. And at that point, she's changed. She's dramatically different. Her intent, her motive is much more focused. You know, all that stuff was really neat to me, man. And again, it just underlines how much of a clear intention there was behind this movie.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's not like it's subtle about it.
No, not
it's
at all.
very blunt, but it kind of works because of how it's presented. You know, and it's not trying to be super artsy, but in its not trying to be super artsy, it kind of is a little bit.
Sometimes it's okay to be upfront with things, and this is a good instance of that, you know. So that was really cool, man. That was really cool. I really enjoyed that. Another big plus for me.
I got
Go
one.
ahead.
Dude hangs dong.
This is a role of the main villain hangs dong. And you know, if this was an American movie, it would have been Kevin Bacon.
He's a French Aaron Eckhart.
Yep.
He looks exactly like. He also
Aaron Eckhart and Luke Wilson mixed together.
Owen. He looks exactly like the character from Dead Rising 2. And in Dead Rising 2, he wears a motorcycle jacket. So I was like, oh my god, it's Chuck Green. And then he hangs dong, and I was like, yay.
Yeah, there's almost like an uncomfortable approach to nudity.
Yeah. I do think, I'm not going to lie though, the hangs dong is kind of a plus because it does lead to kind of a neat scene at the end where they're both basically naked. And it's kind of an interesting stripping of the characters, you know?
Mm-hmm.
They're in their...
It's like a primal state almost. Yeah.
And they're just trying to kill each other, basically. So, though it started off as a retarded thing, I actually do think the hangs dong does actually kind of help.
Yeah, everything... that's the thing about the movie is everything feels like it was meticulously planned. But not to a point where it's like Kubrickian in nature, where you're examining everything. No, there's no need because... As aforementioned, it's presented in such a way where it's easily digestible, and it's part of the storytelling, which is pretty neat, man. It's hard to strike that balance to the visual storytelling be that you know, tight. So yeah, oddly, I should say, the hanging dong weaves into that.
Yeah.
Speaking of hanging dong, it wasn't an effect; it was a real dong. But I will say that the effects in this movie are pretty cool, man. It does not shy away from violence. However, unlike something like Spin Your Grave, it doesn't wallow in it either. You know, it more like builds up and earns the spurts of violence.
Yeah.
Rather than let's go to the next guy and see how creative way he's killed. No, it's in fact it builds up the scene. There's only 3 guys for her to basically get her revenge on. And it builds up to a frothing boil with each one of them. You know, one more than the other, and ultimately the last one being the one that you want to see the most disposed of. And so it feels like you've earned kind of like the morbid delight of, you know, kind of enjoying the visceral aspects of the movie. For lack of better words, you've earned the gore, you know, and I think it really did that quite well. It was pretty badass. And the effects really sell it, and some of them are pretty neat, just straight up, just as effects. Uh, you got something else?
I do like how it does kind of lean into the exploitative side, in that obviously, like you said, she's in basically her underwear the rest of the movie, and that's definitely a throwback to I Spit in Your Grave.
Mm-hmm.
And just the way she looks by the end of the movie, you're like, yeah, that's something that would happen. So it's kind of an interesting, like, homage to the older stuff, while trying and succeeding in adding something of substance to it.
And when we're talking about substance, this is what we mean. And this is my final pro, and then we'll go to your final pro. My final pro is this. The substance of the movie is what really matters. And it really is saying something. And basically these characters are just archetypes, representatives. This is basically an allegory of a movie at its basis, you know. And it's an allegory that is very timely with what's going on today, especially like in Hollywood, which, you know, is kind of sending shockwaves throughout the world. So it mirrors these circumstances quite well. And the male characters just fulfill the kind of, like, I don't want to sound SJW, please, I don't want to sound that way, but the idea of rape culture, which, whether we like it or not, among males is a thing, you know. So the three males here kind of represent three facets of this.
Yeah.
We have the
Guy that just kind
guilty by just sheer complicitness of turning your back on something. I'm aware that it's happening, but I'm not going to say anything about it. You know, we have the direct aggressor with the guy that rapes her. And then we have the guy that's more concerned about the repercussions to himself, and that is willing to put cronyism over the health.
The extreme bros before hoes thing.
Yeah, over the health of another person. And these three characters are kind of like three stooges almost in this movie, you know. Were it not such a grave fucking subject, they almost go through these like visceral Three Stooges deaths to just show how ridiculous this culture is among men, which sadly is a thing, you know. Dub it SJW if you want, but it does exist. I know, because, you know, we've all been there. I mean, here on our channel, we joke about stupid nonsense that could easily be taken out of context, and the snowball can grow, you know. So these characters represent this quite well. So the movie just uses that as a means to really fucking poke a finger at that type of scenario. And so it does have an intent, it does have a purpose, and it just happens to deliver it in this old school exploitative fashion. So it's kind of like magnets, sides of a magnet that shouldn't fit together, but somehow they do work, and somehow they result in something, you know, functional and very entertaining, despite being uncomfortable.
I think the reason why it works, and that would be my final plus, is because it's not super preachy, you know. Mm-hmm. What it's if you're not willing to, or if you're not wanting to look into it that deep, it just is a cool revenge movie. Yeah. But if you're willing to look at it that way, it does add more to it. So it gives you both ends, you know. It's just how you want to see it, basically. So I think that's what it does the best, is that it kind of isn't super preachy. It still sets up a cool, you know, a good series of events. It's still a good movie. And if it's there, if you want to look into that stuff, you can.
Okay, so there you have it, folks. That's our thoughts in terms of the pros. The question now is, any cons for you in this movie? And if so, let me have your first one.
French.
There are Frenchmen in this, unfortunately. Yeah. And, well, sometimes you got to live with the French.
Yeah.
French aside, though.
That's it. Oh, well, you know what? This is a really stupid one. But you know that part where she's looking through the scope and she sees a little iguana? Mm-hmm. It made me laugh because I thought of Nicolas Cage flicking the iguana in that movie.
Bad Lieutenant?
Yeah. So there you go. That's my only con. And it was still not a con.
I have one con, and it's a nitpick.
Mm-hmm.
Because this movie is so meticulously plotted, planned, and shot, you begin to notice a lot more. Now, obviously, they have the constraints of budget and time more so than somebody like, say, Kubrick, who was anal about the way he shot things. I'm not saying it's to that level, but I'm saying they did have more limitations. So if you're looking at it in terms of the shots, you'll notice some things. And for me, the biggest one was that reflective surfaces. Sometimes you can see the camera and the crew. If you're particularly looking out for that, especially on car surfaces, sometimes you'll see the camera and crew. But I'm just nitpicking. It really took 2 viewings to notice that. But it's just one of those things that if you see something so meticulously shot, and you begin to look into the way they structure that, you might just notice. But it's not. It doesn't take anything away from anything that's going on, or the story, or how invested you are in it. So, really, there are no fucking cons for me as far as this movie goes. Quite enjoyable. You know what? I'm gonna throw out one more pro because I do feel it deserves mentioning, and that is the score in this is pretty fucking awesome.
Yeah, I mentioned it.
The techno-industrial grind type of thing. Very awesome, man. Synthy, very 80s, like you said.
Yeah.
So that deserves a mention. Anyway, let's talk about this final score and final thoughts. Hit me with it.
I like it. I wish we would have seen that, or I would have seen this like a couple months ago because I went through this very short-lived rape revenge thing. I saw Vulgar, and I was like, hell yeah, I gotta seek out more. Didn't. So it would have really tickled my fancy back then. That being said, my pickle was tickled. It's pretty great. I'll give it a 10.
Yeah, man, I really like this movie. It took me by surprise. I had high expectations for it because it was getting so many accolades. And again, I'm not one to have movies ruined by my expectations or lack thereof. But this was one of those circumstances where it just happened to live up to all the praise. You know, I had very little to say against it. It manages to strike up a balance that is very hard to achieve. You know, how do you make a message movie out of an exploitation movie that's legitimately a message movie and legitimately an exploitation movie like this, and have it look beautiful and have it have an amazing score and have it have great actors and all this jazz? You know, it's just one of those rare movies where everything just comes together just right. Also, just going to throw in this that's going to get a whole point by itself. There's a part where she takes peyote and kind of goes on this trip.
Oh, yeah.
I really like that. It was pretty neat. I've always been a fan of weird trip sequences in movies, and this one kind of had one of those that was really neat. But anyway, I will give this a solid 9.5, man. It's awesome. It's a great movie. Check it out. Totally worth your time. It gets our recommend. In the meantime, hit like, share, subscribe, and those notification buttons, because we're out.